We've talked about cross-compatibility. We've talked about making good CSS. The next step is really getting all those multiple lines and really all those multiple syntax and cleaning it up. You notice that as we went through CSS, I said, just keep on adding lines in, delete, add, delete. Really, the next goal is cleaning our code up. And there's two techniques that we're going to talk about. The first one is adding multiple classes in one line onto one tag. The second is actually combining multiple lines. So the first thing we're going to do is I've cleaned out my style guide and I've started with a fresh new file. I'm going to actually make a bold link. That's something we're going to use, and I'm going to say, hi, my name is bold. And the end goal here is we're going to play with this to try to collapse a lot of this code together, especially making things that are repetitive. One of the things that happens is as you're working, you get really, really excited and you say, well, I'm going to stylize this in the style guide, and I want to stylize that in the style guide, and I want to make things red, and I want to make things padding, and I want to do all this work. One of the things we want to do is we want to try to remove as much duplicate code as possible. In the previous chapter, I talked about using the clear both, and you notice that one of the things I did is I actually created a separate class just for clear. And what I did is I said, hey, I actually want to make sure that I create a class that I can use over and over and over again. So what if I did that with all of the character styles and the paragraphs and all the sort of the font work in my style guide? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to create multiple classes. I'm going to create a class called red. And the idea of that is it's a color, red. I'm going to make a class called bold. And what I'm just going to say is, hey, what if we did font weight is bold? I'm going to create a class called, or why not? We'll even use bolder. I'm going to use one called big. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a font size of 36 pixels. I reload my page. Of course, nothing's applied. So one of the things I'm going to go back here and say, I have a class, and I want to call it bold. I reload the page, and now it's bold. Well, there's two ways I can do this. I can create an ID or a special class and say, hey, I want to make this bold, and I want to make this red, and I want to make this big. Well, what if I actually decided to leverage a lot of the code that I've written to collapse them in one line? So one of the things I can do, instead of just using one bold, I could actually use some of the techniques that I created. I'm going to use red, and I'm going to use big. So I can say red, and I can say big. What I've done is I've created a space in the class line. I've typed in the second class. I've hit a next space, and I've typed in the third class. So now I have bold, big, and red. And if I wanted to show you how it works again, let's create a second line and say, I want to make bold, big text. I save it, I reload, and now I have another piece of text that actually isn't using red. This is where the power comes in of actually creating styles against text. What if I created a paragraph text that was big and blue and small? I said, hi, my name is paragraph. I come back to my classes. I say I want a class called small, where the font size is 6 pixels. And I want to create a class called blue. And of course, I'm going to use my favorite color in the world, pound 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I hit reload, and here's my blue small font. Again, one of the powers that I'm doing here is I'm creating multiple classes. I'm actually creating my style guide that I'd want to create, and then I'm actually combining them. And there's no limit to the number I can combine. What I don't want to combine is things that are big, blue, small, red, because then what will happen is nothing will work. And that's because of, think about it, is it's loading in top to bottom, left to right. It's going to do blue, and then there's going to be a class that actually overlaps each other. So again, the idea of this technique is to do a lot of work and begin to actually consolidate. I can even, if I wanted, to create padding 25. Let's save this. I create now a padding 25 class. I say padding left is 25 pixels. I set it, I reload, and now I have a padding left to 25. So one of the things I'll do here is you now notice that I've created like families of classes. Classes that have to do with color, classes that have to do with bold and characteristics and attributes, classes that have to do with size, classes that have to do with padding. And one of the things that I can do is I can use a lot of these in multiple places. For me, some of the techniques I use, if I want to move images slightly, I'll create a library of padding. Padding 25, padding 30, padding 50. I might do it in increments of 5, 10, 20. I might also do that with fonts. So that way I can do a font style. So let's say I'm not using font styles that are part of the headers, H1, H2, H3. I want to create unique fonts like a caption, like a small title for an image, like some big text that just pops up. I can actually create them here. Let's say I wanted to use color. I could actually do it here. I can also, one of the things that's powerful for me is I can also combine this with IDs. So let's say there was an ID here called div ID equals, I don't know, let's just call it test. Close the div, make sure the div is closed at the bottom. I can actually come into it. I can say class equals padding 25. I hit reload, and now the div has that padding 25 used in it. And so this is really a lot of power for me to create flexibility. And if you think about it, what I've done is I've cut this down to really, really small number of rows, really, really small number of attributes and syntax, so that I can start leveraging what I have over and over again. I really recommend that you start creating your style guide first. And don't worry about optimizing. Go back and optimize later. Because one of the things that happens is if you start optimizing at the beginning, you start focusing on optimizing, and then you start thinking about other techniques. Think about the style, think about what you want the style guide to look like first, and then work on it. As you do CSS, and as you get better and better and better, all of a sudden you can then flip it, create your styles first, and then actually create the optimizations later and start working them in. Again, part of a great technique, as you go through, one of the things you should also remember, if you have a great style like this that you love, if you have a great library you use always, save it in a reference library. Don't ever create CSS always from scratch. It's always amazing to actually just pull code that you love, libraries that you love, CSS that you love using, just like how I love using rounded corners and opacity and alpha channels. You might actually love using your own CSS to actually create your own library.